Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast about foreign policy and world affairs. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg, editor of UN Dispatch. And in this show, we discuss topical global issues, have conversations with foreign affairs thought leaders and newsmakers, and give you the context you need to understand the world today. Go to globaldispatchespodcast.com to learn more. And now on with the show. My guest today, Mary Robinson, served as the first female president of Ireland from 1990 to 1997. She then served as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and has since undertaken a variety of roles in the UN system, often focusing on human rights, gender equality, and, as is the focus of our conversation today, climate justice. Mary Robinson and I have an extended conversation about what climate justice means and what it entails, and I admit this is a concept that I was unaware of until Mary Robinson began to champion it a few years ago. Mary Robinson now serves as the head of the Mary Robinson Foundation. We spoke a couple of weeks ago in Yerevan, Armenia, where Mary Robinson was serving as part of a jury pool to select the winner of this year's Aurora Prize for Awakening Humanity. This is an honor that was bestowed on a Rohingya human rights lawyer named Kyaw Hla Ang. And if you want to learn more about the Aurora Prize and the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative, I'd encourage you to visit auroraprize.org. And I should say I'll have an interview with one of the other finalists coming up in the next few weeks. Mary Robinson and I had a tight 15 minutes between panel sessions at the Aurora Prize events in Armenia, and I was glad she made time for this interview. I think you will enjoy it very much. I know I did. I've been wanting to speak to her for a while, and this was a great opportunity to interact and meet and speak with someone who is a lifelong champion of human rights. And I should say we also, at the very end, talk about the recent referendum in Ireland on expanding abortion rights. Here is Mary Robinson, former president of Ireland, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, an all-around global amazing person. I do want to kick off by asking you about your podcast. You told me yesterday you told me yesterday that you're about to start a podcast.
Yes.
Plug it, please. Tell everyone.
It's called Mothers of Invention.
Okay.
And necessity is the mother of invention. It's about the climate crisis, which we identify a bit humorously as a man-made crisis, and that it needs women to resolve that crisis. So we're talking about various issues like divestment and litigation on climate change and plastics and food and faith and health. But we're doing it from the perspective of what women are doing and the way women are making a difference.
So let's talk about maybe one of those issues and the ways in which...
Oh, and I should mention that my companion on this podcast, this is the first one I've done, but she's done quite a few, is Maeve Higgins. She's also Irish. She's based in New York, and she's a comedian. Okay. And she provokes me. We have a great time together.
You have a good rapport.
Very good rapport.
Yeah, okay. You're like the straight woman to her comic relief.
A little bit, but she's drawing me to the dark side.
Well, I so look forward to listening to it.
Yeah, I think it's important that we have that humor as well as a really basic seriousness. We're both very concerned. I mean, I've made her change all her lifestyle, she says, from the fact that she's now aware of the climate crisis and how little time we have to change our behavior.
So in preparing for this interview, I was thinking about the term climate justice, and I believe and I realized it was you that introduced me to the concept at the Rio Plus 20 conference. I was, a member of the press that was there, and I remember you gave a talk, and that was the first time I'd really ever been exposed to the idea, the concept of climate justice. The Rio Plus 20, for people who don't know, is a big UN conference in Rio de Janeiro in 2012. So could you just explain for people who are not aware of the concept what that is?
I think the easiest way to understand climate justice is to begin with the injustice of the impacts of climate change. And that injustice stems from the fact that it's the poorest countries and poorest communities, even in richer countries, that suffer disproportionately. And they're not the ones that are driving cars, that are doing major manufacturing, that have central heating, etc. And yet I became aware of this working in Africa after I had served for 5 years as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. I didn't make a single speech on climate change and human rights, on climate justice then. But working in Africa on issues like right to health, water, women, peace and security, everybody kept saying to me, but things are so much worse now. And I discovered the worst was we just don't know what's happening. We don't know, our harvests are being destroyed. We don't know when to sow. We don't know when to, we have long periods of drought and then we have flash flooding. It's destroyed the village. It's destroyed the school over and over again. And I realized I'd kind of missed that connection between climate change and its negative impact on human rights. Now, fortunately, the Human Rights Council has caught up with this issue and issues a lot of resolutions and a lot of reports on just how negative climate change is for all kinds of human rights.
Was there a moment, a singular moment that you could point to where that realization, that connection was apparent to you, that you realized that this is something that you ought to devote your time and attention to?
I think it was certainly crystallized when I was honorary president of Oxfam before Copenhagen, before that conference, which was the first conference I attended, first climate conference.
That was the 2008
yes,
climate conference.
That's right.
Yes.
And it was supposed to be a big breakthrough one, but turned out not to be. Mm-hmm. And I was asked by Oxfam to be part of their gathering evidence from people on the ground of how bad the situation was. And I sat on a panel with Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and we listened to 5 farmers from different parts of Africa. 4 of them were women, of course, which is the reality. And as we listened, each story, the only man was from Kenya, and he was down from 200 cattle to 20. A woman from Mali had said that a lot of her colleagues were now involved in prostitution, things had got so bad. But the one that really affected me, and she became a friend subsequently, was Constance O'Kellet from northern Uganda. And when I sort of began to tease these 5 farmers, I said, I come from the west of Ireland, my father was a doctor, we used to go out into the countryside, and he would always talk to the farmers about the weather, and inevitably they always complained. Too much sun, too much rain, whatever it was. And I said, is this the problem? And I remember Constance saying in a very firm voice, this is outside our experience. And she looked at me very sternly. And I thought I'd better find out more about her experience. And she's one of the stories that I've written in a book that's coming out in September on climate justice, stories of hope and resilience and the fight for sustainable futures.
So can you tell another story from your book then? This seems like a good opportunity to tease it.
Yeah. One of the stories is about the hurricane in Louisiana. Katrina.
Yeah, 2005.
2005. Yes. And it's a hairdresser who had her hairdressing salon, Sharon. She came to the conference in Copenhagen, and she was slightly embarrassed to come from a rich country and be with so many developing country women telling their stories, like Constance O'Kellet, though they became friends. Her story was that they were devastated in their neighborhood, and because it was she was a woman of color, their neighborhood just couldn't recover, and she became a real activist in that context. Another story is of Jani from the Sami people in northern Sweden, talking about being a reindeer farmer, and that the change in the weather means it goes from cold, which is fine for the reindeer because they can smell the nurture under the snow. Then it begins to warm up, and then it goes cold again, and there's a thin sheet of ice, and that causes the reindeer to go further and further. And of course, the herders go further and both die. They go onto the thin ice. And so, the way in which these women are coping and telling their stories is fantastic.
So what can the international community do? What can individuals do to sort of push back against this sort of gender climate nexus that you've identified, that you've devoted your recent life's work to?
Well, the Paris Agreement was an extremely important breakthrough and gave us the goals and targets, if you like, that we have to stay well below 2 degrees of warming. We've just got above one degree, so we have very little space to increase our emissions. We've got to cut our emissions, which means we've got to move to clean energy electric cars on clean energy, much more energy efficiency. And there are so many things we can do in our own lives. We can eat less meat. Because that is, the way in which land is used to create emissions. Beef needs far more than even chickens, for example, and we can also recycle much more effectively. I'm very glad that we've realized how dangerous plastics have become for our whole world. Plastics in the sea, plastics in fish.
We seem to be at like a turning point there.
Yes, we do.
It's interesting. You see more and more countries,
Yep.
who they're banning. I think like Uganda might be banning plastic bags, or perhaps Kenya.
Kenya. And I went to Rwanda recently for a conference about African leadership. I flew from Amsterdam to Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. And when we landed, the pilot on the KLM flight said, if any of you have plastic bags, for example, if you've bought duty-free, leave your bags on the plane. You can get a heavy fine or imprisonment if you bring them into Rwanda. I thought, isn't that great?
Well, I don't know about imprisonment. That's
no, well,
but the
severe,
concept.
Severe, yeah. Taking it really seriously.
Mm-hmm. Well, so, I mean, we again seem to sort of be at a turning point there. What do you do sort of every single day to try to promote the empowerment of women as they fight against the climate injustice, the man-made crises that you said?
Well, with my foundation, we brought together women who were ministers of energy, ministers of environment, in a troika of women leaders, because the troika came from the fact that 3 women had presided over the COPs in the conferences of the parties in Copenhagen, which we mentioned. The following year it was in Cancun under a woman foreign minister, and the following year after that it was in Durban under a South African foreign minister. So 3 women presided over a conference, and they helped us to bring together women who were coming to conferences in a leadership position. And we got the gender action plan eventually, partly through them, partly through a wider constituency of women working very hard for this. And now these women are trying to open the door for the voices of grassroots women coming into the conference. Indigenous women, indigenous voices, which are really very important in saving forests, in being more vulnerable and having to be more resilient very quickly. And so that's one of the things we've been doing. I'm using the podcast, Mothers, Mothers of Invention, and the book coming out in September, which Bloomsbury will be publishing, which is stories. 9 of the 11 stories are about women, as it happens. This is just because there is such a gender dimension to climate change.
Is there an aspect of that gender dimension that even that people generally don't get? People listening to this podcast, I think, are generally well informed. Maybe they're in the policy community as well. But is there an aspect of that even sort of informed interlocutors just don't seem to get?
Maybe it's sort of not fully understood the different impacts that climate has on men and women in developing countries because of the role of women. Women play a different role even in agriculture. It's men who go to the markets and sell. Men do different crops sometimes from women. Women in sudden hurricanes gather up the children, wear long skirts so they can't climb trees, can't run as fast. And women and children suffer disproportionate deaths and injuries from hurricanes, from cyclones that are becoming more severe in small islands or in vulnerable communities. There are so many different aspects. Women have to go further for the water. They have to go further for the firewood. So if you are going further, you're more prone to be, attacked en route, raped perhaps. And all of these are exacerbated by climate change. It has this kind of negative, worrying, exacerbating effect on what was, in any case, the reality of the gender divide and the gender difference in countries.
So it almost acts as like a catalyst of the negative trends that we already see. It just makes everything that bit worse.
Yeah.
In our last moment, can I sort of ask you to put on your former president of Ireland hat and talk a little bit about this amazing referendum? We're speaking a few weeks after it. How sort of have you approached that news? What's your reaction to what happened?
I'm very proud of my country. I was proud of the referendum on same-sex marriage. We were the first country to have a referendum, and it was very positive because it wasn't an urban-rural divide. Every county in the country voted positively except one in the west of Ireland, Roscommon. This time, in a much, much more difficult issue for the Irish people, to have to come to terms with the fact that we had to address an amendment of the Constitution which had equated the life of the mother and the life of the unborn. As a very active senator in 1983, I spent a lot of time opposing putting that into the Constitution, warning about what might happen. And that YouTube video of me arguing with a male counterpart who was very much supporting making that amendment to the Constitution, that did the rounds a lot before the election.
It went viral before there was Verla.
Well, yes, it was repeated over and over again. It went on to serious programs. They would just do that clip.
Yeah.
That's was helpful to me because as a former president, it's not the practice to engage in what is essentially a very political issue. I didn't need to because my views were known and I was able to say I haven't changed them. But I really was very proud of the fact that young women in particular, young men and women in Ireland, opened up a conversation, gave up on no one, talked to their grandmothers, talked to anybody who would talk to them and said, we have to address this. We have to mature as a society. A lot of young people came back to vote at their own expense and they really encouraged the need to address this very difficult issue. To be honest, when I saw the kind of celebration, I thought that's a bit too much. You know, this is just a very difficult issue and a painful issue and very difficult for women who have to face that issue. And it wasn't so much, but I think what we were proud of was that at last we had matured into understanding the need to respect women's rights and to give women the responsibility for that decision and to enable it to happen in Ireland and not export it to Britain as had happened over the years.
It was powerful to watch from abroad, watch on social media, the hashtags of going home.
Absolutely.
To vote. It was a very moving experience.
Yeah, it was. And it was,
for me from afar.
It was very much affirming the position of women in society, which, we still need to fully affirm.
Well, I must let you go, but before I do, I just want to say thank you so much for, just on a personal level, for introducing me to the concept of climate justice. Those years ago in Brazil, it's something that I've been following. I'm just grateful and honored to speak with you. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for letting me, again, share my passion for climate justice. And the one thing it requires is a solidarity in our world. And that solidarity was there in 2015 with the Agenda 2030, 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the Climate Agreement. We've kind of fractured it a little bit in America first, other countries first, more autocratic leaders, more kind of hate speech. We actually need that solidarity because without it, no country will weather climate change. Every country will suffer the way the most vulnerable parts of the world are already suffering unless we can get on top of it, which we can. I'm absolutely convinced we can have a much better future by having a renewable energy future, an energy efficient future, actually being less consumer driven and more thoughtful about mending things. I grew up in an era where we mended things, that broke, and we need to have a circular economy where we have very little waste. That would be good for everything.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to the podcast as well. I can't wait.
It's my first podcast, so I'm excited about it.
Excited. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to the Honorable Mary Robinson. That was great. As I mentioned earlier, I'll have one more episode coming from my time I spent in Yerevan as part of the Aurora Prize delegation, I suppose you can say. I was invited there, and the Aurora Prize people paid for my flight and hotel, and I was very glad they did. It was a really inspiring time, and I'm looking forward to having them as an advertiser actually next month, so stay tuned. As always, feel free to get in touch with me via the contact button on globaldispatchespodcast.com. Love hearing from you guys. And I also want to plug my bonus episode with Ambassador Samantha Power. You can access that by becoming a patron of the show. There's a link where you can support the show via the Patreon platform and unlock that bonus episode and other bonus episodes as well. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye.